Because as I'm sitting here, and there seemed to be this question of you're either diverse or you're qualified, all I could think about was the fact that I currently hold an honorary doctorate. I also hold a Juris Doctorate. I also hold a bachelor's. I also technically hold the rank of Lieutenant Colonel in the Civil Air Patrol, and I actually practiced law for almost 2 decades, in addition to serving on various boards, in addition to being a prior state lawmaker. And there are those that would make some people believe that because I happen to be Black and or a woman, that somehow, even though I can rattle off all the qualifications in the world, my Blackness makes me unqualified.
Let's talk about something important. Lately, a lot of organizations, schools, and workplaces are focusing on diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, also known as DEI. Advocates believe these initiatives are essential for creating a fair and accessible society for everyone. However, DEI has also faced a lot of criticism from different sources, leading to a heated debate about its impact and effectiveness. Mr. Sessions spoke and expressed his belief that qualifications should be prioritized over diversity in decision-making processes. He argued that selecting individuals based on their skills, experience, and merit is more important than focusing on diversity criteria. So to sum that up, he believes that you're either qualified or diverse.
Chair recognizes the chairman of the Government Operations Subcommittee, Mr. Sessions from Texas, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. I hope that the gentleman, Mr. Shriver, sees that, as I spoke to you yesterday, on both sides of this committee, Republican and Democrat, you would be offered and asked what I consider to be professional questions that are important to the legislative responsibility that we have, and I appreciate the distinguished gentleman from Maryland and Kentucky and my other members for attempting to follow the same norm. I think it's important that the American people also see that we make this about them and not about either one of our parties. Mr. Shriver, there are 2 overwhelming questions that I would like to engage in right now, and one is the term qualified versus diversity, hiring on diversity. You've heard conversations, I'm sure, out of this committee and in the press, I'm sure in your administration, about hiring qualified employees as opposed to adding a diverse workforce. Could you please tell me the OPM decision structure on this issue?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. We support the President's initiative on diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, that we are implementing that initiative consistent with the merit system principles, which require fair and equitable treatment without regard to
All right,
race
sir, thank you very much. Well, I'm talking about the hiring procedures. So under this term that we just used, diversity, does a person have to be qualified and fit the same parameters and recommendations that it would for any employee being hired?
100%, sir. That is part of the merit system principles.
So what you're attempting to do is to upgrade the number of people, I get this, across our country to give everyone a fair and equitable chance, so to speak, at getting a job. And you're simply highlighting the need where numbers do not reflect that. Would that be appropriate way to say this?
Right. So we look for barriers, and so one barrier, for example, Congressman, is the lack of paid internships in the federal government. That's a barrier to people seeking federal employment. So we issued guidance early in the administration to require more paid internships, as an example.
Do you think that also helps people to against people who do not have those opportunities for an internship? Is it simply a check that's given them that you will now give them a higher threshold for entrance?
I'm sorry, I'm not quite following your question.
Do you use that as a measure then to determine to give them, like a veteran, an extra plus because they have completed it? So you use that as a measure.
Thank you for the clarification. So any time spent working in a federal job can help you qualify for your next federal job.
Thank you very much. Director, I would like to move now to the question of the government inventing new processes, procedures to compete against the free enterprise system, about what it already exists and the government developing these rather than seeking opportunities. We've talked about D18, which was an organization that was brought in under President Obama that we believe, after a hearing on both sides, that they did not perform the duties that they said they did. It caused great consternation to .gov with deception. I would also bring up other agencies that go and compete. For instance, Jobs USA. Meanwhile, there are numerous pre-enterprise system people that have a broader grasp of people to find government jobs, whether it be in Waco, Texas, or whether it be in New York City, that they are already established. And I find that this government is going and spending taxpayer money to embellish their systems to go and hire more people. What are you finding? Are you finding that they just get this money and go do that? Or is OPM saying, let's not recreate a marketplace answer that's already there? What would the OPM answer be as your direction to agencies?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. So with respect to USA Jobs, that's been something that OPM has run now for, I think, some 15 years. One of the key design features of USA Jobs was, we called it a universal trailer hitch, which basically the idea is that any staffing system could plug into USA Jobs, and so agencies could use whatever staffing system they wanted from the private sector.
Without regard for OPM trying to direct those agencies about a preference or a way to use. So would you consider, if OPM went to an agency and said, we're trying to stay leading edge, but let's not do something that might be a competitive edge or against another provider that's already out there, you're saying that would not be tolerated?
I think it's very important that we maintain a level playing field for all of these staffing systems, as long as they meet the requirements, which are like cybersecurity requirements and such, and an agency wants to use them, then they should be able to use them.
But I'm talking about the agency giving preference to their own development and their own product.
So again, I think it's really important that we maintain a level playing field. So when we are offering a product that, as an agency, that also the private sector is offering, a staffing system is the primary example.
Let me go back on this.
Okay.
Would you use your competitive insight to offer to a federal agency that they should use you and not someone else, a preference? Would that be permissible under your rules and regulations from OPM for you to direct or to solicit something against another competitor in the marketplace?
No. My clear direction is that we maintain a level playing field for private sector vendors.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the time. And to the ranking member, I think that this is a great hearing, and I appreciate both of you for professionally moving this forward. I yield back my time.
Ms. Brown focused on DEI initiatives and emphasized how important they are for creating a fair and inclusive society. Ms. Brown argued that DEI policies help ensure that everyone has equal opportunities and that diverse perspectives are included in decision-making processes. She believes that these initiatives are crucial for addressing systemic inequalities and building a more equitable environment.
Ms. Brown, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As we've heard today, a nonpartisan, expert, and merit-based civil workforce is essential to delivering the services Americans expect from our government. Our national security depends on it, as do the day-to-day services we rely on, like timely mail, SNAP benefit delivery, and Social Security checks. Our federal agencies can be exceptional if their workers reflect the diverse experiences and demographics of our population. Diversity and inclusion aren't just nice to have, they are a must-have. One of OPM's guiding principles is, and I quote, "When experienced and diverse teams tap their collective knowledge, we get better results." We know that prioritizing DEIA will improve individual and team performance. To get the most from our workforce, every employee should feel welcome. So, Acting Director Shriver, how do you make the case for efforts to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion in the federal government?
Thank you for the question, Congresswoman. I'm proud of OPM's efforts as an agency, including with respect to promoting DEIA. I think the business case is closed, that in order for organizations to maximize their performance and their effectiveness, they need to pay attention to DEIA. That's why we have emphasized removing barriers to federal employment opportunities by doing things like requiring internships to be paid, by improving pay for blue-collar workers and instituting a $15 an hour minimum wage, by hiring people based on the skills they have and not imposing unnecessary degree requirements, by conducting barrier analyses, by launching the first ever military-connected strategic plan so we can get more military spouses into the government. Those are the actions we're taking, Congresswoman.
Thank you very much. And there's plenty of data to back up your claims, Mr. Shriver. I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record this article from Harvard Business Review entitled, "Why Diverse Teams Are Smarter."
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. Unfortunately, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle would rather weaken, shrink, and undermine our federal workforce by eliminating diversity of initiatives that bring people with new ideas, backgrounds, and experiences to the table. The Republican nominee for president has made his intention to fire experienced and expert officials in the government with whom he disagrees politically very clear. This is extremely dangerous and would make us all less safe, less secure, and worse off. So, Acting Director Shriver, can you speak to the need for expert, nonpartisan officials in all aspects of the federal workforce, including the agencies maintaining our food safety, our transportation, and even our justice system?
Thank you, Congresswoman. I think it's essential for the American people to be able to count on the information that's provided by the federal government, to be able to count on the fact that our political leaders are getting the best advice they can get based on subject matter experts who have experience and expertise in their fields, and that all of us are better as leaders and our government operates more effectively and more efficiently if we can rely on the expert advice of our career civil service.
Thank you so much. This could not be more important as our country faces efforts to politicize the federal workforce rather than strengthen and support the agencies doing life-saving and critical work every day. I just want to personally thank you, Acting Director Shriver, and the Biden-Harris administration for your continued commitment to the best interests of all Americans. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Mr. Frost pointed out the urgent need to address the high rates of gun violence in the country. He emphasized that gun homicides are a significant public safety issue and called for more effective measures to reduce these rates. He discussed the impact of gun violence on communities and the importance of implementing policies that can help save lives and improve safety.
Chair now recognizes Mr. Frost from Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think it's important to know that the government is already saving money on the hybrid and telework policies. GSA reports that over $150 million were saved across government agencies in 2022. And so I'm glad that work is already being done right now. An expert, nonpartisan government is the only way government can deliver critical services. My constituents in Central Florida rely on the federal government for their benefits and help keep them safe. Mr. Schreier, if anyone in our federal workforce could be fired for pursuing evidence-based policy implementation and were instead forced to do the partisan bidding of a particular politician, how might that impact the safety of Americans?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. I think that kind of system would do a huge disservice to leaders in federal agencies and to the American people. It is critical that federal workers have the protections so that they are able to offer their honest advice, their honest opinions, even when unpopular, or perhaps even when their opinion based on their expertise may be something that the leadership would disagree with. The leaders always have the opportunity to make the decision that they need to make, and then federal employees need to follow and implement it. But it would do great damage to our system and a disservice to the American people, including to safety and national security, if our experts were chilled in their ability to bring their honest analysis to their leadership.
Yeah, I mean, when Donald Trump was president, he proposed the policy that's been brought up, Schedule F, which he's still campaigning on right now, which would have allowed him to replace civil servants with Trump henchmen. And it's dangerous because these goons have no mandate to protect Americans. I mean, last year, Americans suffered over 43,000 gun violence deaths, including 655 mass shootings. Trump's and Republicans in Congress will not take any action to prevent gun violence, and they've even promised to tear apart the ATF, Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. The ATF is the agency responsible for regulating types of gun modifications used in mass shootings and for preventing firearms from being trafficked to those involved in community gun violence. Mr. Shriver, just this past Saturday, at an NRA event, Trump reiterated his vow to roll back the Biden administration's gun violence prevention policies and work. As of right now, would civil servants risk losing their jobs if they didn't abandon long-term science-driven projects to carry out Trump's campaign promises?
As of right now, Congressman, as of right now, what is expected of federal employees is that they will bring their expertise, their analysis, their skills to their job every day and offer the best advice that they can to their leadership. That is what is expected of them today. I can't speak to what might be expected of them under a different administration.
Exactly, because Schedule F is not currently law, and our federal workforce is still highly trained, nonpartisan group of dedicated civil servants doing the work. What steps has OPM taken to ensure that the rights and independence of our federal workforce are better protected?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. First of all, I think that we've made clear at OPM that every federal employee is to be valued and treated with dignity and respect. We have worked over the last several years to strengthen the federal workforce through a number of policy initiatives to improve the hiring process, to remove barriers by eliminating unnecessary degree requirements and focusing on skills, and the regulation that you mentioned, the strengthening the civil service protections regulation, which we believe clarifies what the existing rules are under the laws passed by Congress.
In 2020, firearms became the leading cause of death for American children. And then in 2022, homicide emerged as the leading cause of death for pregnant people in the United States. And according to Harvard study, over 10 years, 68% of those homicides involved a gun. The Biden administration created the first ever White House Office of Gun Violence Prevention. I'm worried about what a potential, President Trump would do to these sort of offices, whether taking them apart and removing the evidence-based work that's going on, or installing political goons that don't care about science and evidence-based work that experts know that we need to do. We need a government focused on improving the lives of children, those who are pregnant, everybody else facing the gun violence crisis. And for that, we need an expert, nonpartisan federal workforce vested in the authority to follow science and evidence. Thank you.
Would the gentleman yield for a question?
I yield the remaining of my time.
Just say a word about what that office is doing, if you would, Mr. Frost, and explain why it would be risky to get rid of it.
Well, the Office of Gun Violence Prevention does a few things, but two I want to highlight is, number one, speeding up implementation of the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, money that goes to all of our districts, and number two, working to act as sort of a FEMA to help municipal governments after a shooting happens, which they've helped in Republican districts as well. This is why when a bill came to the floor to defund this office, not only was it was saved in a bipartisan way with 7 Republicans voting to save the office, because they see why this nonpartisan, important office is important to saving the lives of our constituents.
Gentleman's time.
Ms. Crockett immediately lets them know that no matter how qualified a person is, being black and a woman still makes her seem unqualified to some people. She argued that even highly skilled and experienced individuals can be unfairly judged and overlooked simply because they are part of a minority group. She emphasized the need to recognize and address these biases to ensure that everyone's qualifications are truly valued and appreciated.
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair now recognizes Ms. Crockett.
I didn't realize that Mr. Moskowitz had left. All right, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for what you do for the American people. I just want to go over a few things that are concerning and alarming to me. I don't know if you're familiar, but have you ever heard of Project 2025?
I've read about that, Congresswoman.
Okay. And there are some things indicated in Project 2025 that are quite concerning to me. And I want to talk about a few of those topics because this hearing almost feels like a Project 2025 hearing. One of those topics is diversity in the workplace. The agenda includes making sure that the next conservative administration dismantles DEI apparatus by eliminating various chief diversity officer positions, et cetera. And you engaged in an exchange earlier with one of my colleagues, and I don't know if you recall, but it was hitting me a little differently as a Black woman sitting here, because it almost seemed as if you either get diversity or you get qualifications. It did not seem as if my colleague understood that someone can be diverse and qualified. And it is why you have people like me that get very frustrated, not just in the halls of Congress, but in general in this country. Because as I'm sitting here, and there seemed to be this question of you're either diverse or you're qualified, all I could think about was the fact that I currently hold an honorary doctorate. I also hold a Juris Doctorate. I also hold a bachelor's. I also technically hold the rank of Lieutenant Colonel in the Civil Air Patrol, and I actually practiced law for almost 2 decades, in addition to serving on various boards, in addition to being a prior state lawmaker. And there are those that would make some people believe that because I happen to be Black and or a woman, that somehow, even though I can rattle off all the qualifications in the world, my Blackness makes me unqualified. My question to you is that the attitude that you subscribe to?
Absolutely not, Congresswoman. In fact, what we do at OPM every day is look to knock down barriers that are keeping qualified people like yourself, qualified people from all across America for pursuing federal jobs. Some of the things that we've done, for example, are eliminate unnecessary degree requirements and assess people based on the skills that they have and not just where they learned them. We have opened the doors to recruiting from HBCUs, HSIs, minority-serving institutions, populations that may not have thought of the federal government as an employer before. And we have a broad definition of diversity. There are rural populations that have in the past never considered the federal government as a potential employer because the offices were too far away and they would have to get up and leave from their hometown. Now there are some opportunities that they can stay right in that rural hometown and work for the federal government, let alone the amazing military spouses around this country who have to pick up and move in their jobs when their spouse is redeployed. Trying to tap in and keep that talent in government has been a big priority as ours.
Thank you so much for giving a plug to the Readiness Act that this committee did just pass out last week in a bipartisan way. But you know, it's interesting because we've had so many conversations about telework and the evils of telework. And it seems to be this other false equivalency that if you telework, that means you're not working, instead of this idea that people are actually just working and they're not working in the building that is being paid for by the federal government. In fact, my mom is on telework, and my mom is absolutely one of the smartest people that I know. And so it always hits me a little differently every time we dump on those that are teleworking for the federal government. But interestingly enough, we're not allowed to telework here. We have to show up. There is no remote voting anymore. But even though we show up, are you aware of the fact that this has been the most unproductive Congress in the history of the Congress?
Congressman, I'll leave that judgment to members of Congress.
Okay, well, I'll tell you, it is, and I've got some numbers for you. So to me, you can show up and still not do a daggone thing. And so it's rich that we have so many opinions to give you and to tell you how to do your job, but seemingly we're not doing ours. Thus far, only 1% of legislation that has been introduced has been passed in this Congress versus the last Congress where it was 6 points higher, and the Congress before that 6 points higher, and the Congress before that 7 points higher. There is no other Congress that has been least productive, and guess what? The last Congress, they could vote remotely, and somehow they figured out how to get it done. So I would just say that we need to be very mindful of when we decide to throw stones, because we may reside in a glass house. Thank you so much for your work.
What do you think about the impact of bias on recognizing qualifications? Let me know your thoughts in the comments.